My name is Siek and I'm from Indiana University. And today I'm going to present what to expect when you are no longer expecting, information needs of women who experience miscarriage. This is work that I collaborated on with my colleagues Cassie Kresnye and Lucia Guerra-Reyes from Indiana University, and Mona Alqassim and Maria Wolters from the University of Edinburgh. And before we go any further, we want to provide a warning that in this talk we will be discussing miscarriage and infant loss. Miscarriage is when someone experiences a pregnancy loss before 20 to 23 weeks in gestation. We know that 1 in 5 pregnant people will miscarry, so it is a common occurrence. In terms of how we as a pervasive health community have investigated, we haven't done too much. There's been a lot of work in supporting the fertility to parent continuum. So we've done a lot of self-monitoring, especially menstrual tracking, and fertility tracking, where we know it's complex. There's a lot of pressure sensed by people, and there's an emotional burden to it. The other piece that Epstein et al. In these pictures showed that there's this kind of sense of that participants or people or users want pink and flowery types of interfaces, and that the context is important. People who are tracking them for menstruation aren't there for the goal of conception. We also know that that information search is integral to pregnancy and women's health. Briana et al. Has shown that even our web searches can kind of indicate our progress through this continuum. And then we also know that parenthood is complicated with lots of black boxes to navigate the health information processes to get care. And then there's been lots of work on social support, because we know that this changes through pregnancy and new parenthood. So for example, Pervasive in their study did these circle diagrams for women, looked at who was in their social network, with them in the center, and before they were pregnant, and then after when they were a new parent, and we saw the changes there. One thing that keeps coming up is that technology plays a key role in facilitating certain types of support for new parents. In terms of supporting miscarriage, we know that there's been work for internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy programs to help with coping with a miscarriage, as Kresnye did. And we know that when people don't receive the information they need from their doctors, they often turn to online forums, which Bet's researched here. And then Andalivi and Forte showed us how an individual's motivation to disclose their experience, especially surrounding miscarriage, was very much dependent on how one's network and observations of other people disclose it. We know from this past work that women seek information based on their individualized experiences, but it's a very manual process. You have to go out there, get the information, or find it within your network. What we want to see and to help with the pervasive health community is to understand if we can identify the time scale of miscarriage journey, provide some contextual clues, and the information systems preferred, so that we can provide personalized based information based on one's experiences. For our work we're reporting here, we use the asynchronous remote communities method, or the ARC method created by McLeod. We know that there are lots of people all over the world with similar experiences, and we know that they often go to online forums to find support and information. And so they may be on various forums or different groups to connect with each other. So with the ARC method, what we do is we create a private group or private forum within a social media platform, and then we engage participants with questions and activities. And so for our ARC study, it was 8 weeks, and we had 42 participants. We broke it up into 2 ARC groups. We had 21 participants who had not had a live birth since their last miscarriage, and 21 participants who had had a live birth before their last miscarriage. Now, I have our demographics table here with more detail, but overall, we mostly had participants who were white women who were in their 30s to 40s, and they had at least an undergraduate or sometimes even a postgraduate education. We know participants regularly log on to Facebook, but their usage varied greatly. We had 16 activities over the 8 weeks. Most of our activities were free text activities. As an example here, we posted about a Dear Abby. With the free text activities, it gave participants the ability to kind of share their thoughts, reply to each other, and interact with each other a little bit more. We also had 2 media type activities. So for example, one of them that we were on here is a timeline where we asked participants to draw out a timeline, take a picture, and post it. And then people could interact with it. Now, we categorize it as a media/free text activity because some participants chose to just write out their timeline instead of make it visual. And then we had 6 surveys during this 8-week period. Similar to past ARC studies, participants responded well to the surveys. We see in this table here where on our x-axis we have the activities, and our y-axis we have percentage of participation combined with the 2 ARC groups. And surveys here are always had at least 70% participation. But also we see there's a slight drop. The purple indicates the free text activities. So over time, there's a slight drop in the free text activities. And we only had 2 media studies, so it's kind of difficult to kind of determine what was going on with participation here. For this paper, we analyzed data from 6 activities: the timeline activity, a Dear Abby activity, and My Miscarriage. These 3 activities allowed us to triangulate. Even though they're media and free text, we can look at the participants' answers to these so they can talk about their own miscarriage versus the timeline, so we can get more richer detail here. We also looked at missing information, important information that they wanted to receive, and technology use. With these activities, we were able to develop a physical and emotional timeline and the resource needs of our participants. But for time's sake, for this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on the physical and emotional timeline. We had over 50 timelines submitted by participants, and we have some examples here for you to see of the kind of varying detail that's provided here. We can see that some participants remembered the dates around the activity, and others were more attracted just the month. And then something also noting is that they often added in details, not prompted by us, but added in details about spotting versus bleeding versus gushing. This was all based on the participant's own choice of words, so experiences may vary here. From these timeline and the activities data, we created this abstracted timeline. So the first thing we did was we looked at the participants' experiences and abstracted it here in a Sankey diagram. Then we created an abstracted timeline based on their other comments and quotes that they created in our qualitative analysis. And then we kind of talk about the resource needs that they need to out this abstracted timeline. In terms of pregnancy acknowledgement, most of our participants talked about this, over half, and there was some excitement. They usually talk to their partner. Even if they weren't necessarily excited about the pregnancy, they usually disclose to a very small subset of trusted partners. And then we have the early pregnancy stage. This is where participants either found out they were pregnant through testing at home, or they went to the doctor and found out if they were pregnant. One of the things that we see here too is this uncertainty in that they would maybe get an ultrasound, there may be a heartbeat, there may not be a heartbeat, but until the healthcare community really knows what's going on, maybe it's a bit too early to see a heartbeat, maybe they aren't really 6 weeks pregnant. We see a cycle of more appointments before they can actually confirm if a miscarriage is occurring. So in this early pregnancy stage, what we would encourage the research community to do is consider the context of one's pregnancy. So here are some quotes we have from participants. On the left side, we have our excited quotes. They're excited, they're giving their daughter a promoted to big sister shirt, they're thinking about how their life will change. Some of them are excited and just feel like, you know what, that last miscarriage I had, that was already the bad experience, and now we're having something better. Whereas other participants they didn't want to have the baby. There was these intense feelings of anxiety or depression, or they were just really anxious and hard to muster and excited because they've already gone through that miscarriage experience. And what we need to do in our designs of these systems when we're providing information is to make sure we understand how are they feeling beforehand to understand what kind of resources they may need later. Then we talk about this trigger event. Now, with the trigger event, this is where they know something's not right. Even with the no heartbeat, there's always, participants talk about this hope that maybe there'll be a heartbeat eventually. Maybe in the next appointment, it'll happen. And so with these trigger events, what we know is that we can use these trigger events as signals for resources in terms of the systems and the apps that we design. So for this quote here, the participant saying that I remember not really knowing what to do. It was painful physically, and the doctor prepared them for the painful part. However, she bled so much she was scared, and this happened. This was discussed over and over, especially with the bleeding and being scared. And so on the bottom here, when we look at our timelines, we can kind of get a better understanding of when these trigger events are starting. So on our x-axis, we have length of pregnancy. 0 is the time that pregnancy is actually confirmed based on their timeline. And then on the y-axis, we have those trigger events. And again, spotting and bleeding is based on the participants' own categorization of it. But we can kind of see that once we see those events happening, we can maybe look at we can either collect better data, or we can also think about what else we can provide participants to kind of set them up for understanding what may happen next. And then after the miscarriage, there's a medical decision and grieving. In the paper, we also talk about the recovery, but today we're just going to be talking about these stages of the miscarriage journey. And so when we are going through that grieving process, one opportunity for pervasive health is to look at how we can connect people with empathetic professionals or a larger network. And so when we look at the information needs in this chart here, we have the information needs on our y-axis, and on the x-axis we have the number of responses, and then we also see in green essential to know. A lot of the essential to know were detecting the miscarriage, the medical options, because a lot of times, especially if people found out there was no heartbeat and they knew how far along they were, in those situations, participants were asked to make decisions about their pregnancy in this raw state, knowing that they just lost their pregnancy. They're asked about what the options they should do. Should they do surgery? Do they want to take a pill? Do they want to go home and let nature take its course? And so that was one of the major questions. And the duration of bleeding and when to try again. And so these quotes kind of represented is that they wanted to receive more support from hospital staff, and they just felt brushed off. There were some participants who did have good experiences, but I think helping connect people with empathetic professionals would help, and research has shown it will help if they have a follow-up appointment with a professional to help them overcome their miscarriage experiences. And then in terms of the mental stream here, we need to kind of help guide them to resources. And so we know that there's participants were interested in the mental impact, the next steps. They wanted to talk to someone and to have support groups. And often people found them on their own. So in these quotes here, I sought counseling myself, but it would have been helpful, useful to receive guidance as to where to find this. And information about support groups would have been beneficial. In the end, I found my own through an online forum. Something concrete would have helped. So we need to have better mechanisms to help participants find these resources. And so how are we to support those who are no longer expecting? We want to design systems that consider the context of one's pregnancy. We want to collect and analyze trigger events to provide resources. This is just from 50 timelines. We need a lot more data to understand it better. And we have to decide when we want to collect that data, because participants are under tremendous strain when they're going through the miscarriage. And we want to connect people with empathetic professionals or groups. So thank you for listening to our presentation, and we would be happy to talk to you more